The tires of the taxi crunched against the gravel driveway as I leaned forward, catching my first glimpse of home in years. The house stood much the same as I remembered, the white paint gleaming against the North Carolina sun. Yet, there was an eerie unfamiliarity I couldn't shake. The roses, Emily's pride and joy, were gone. In their place stood a row of bland shrubs, the kind you'd expect to see outside a government building. A chill crept up my spine, though the summer heat pressed heavy on my shoulders. Something wasn't right. I paid the driver, hoisting my duffel bag onto my shoulder, and approached the porch. The screen door hung slightly ajar, swaying in the breeze. A forgotten detail, or something more? My boots clunked against the wooden steps as I called out, "Logan? Emily." Before I reached the door, it swung open, and there he was. My son Logan, 12 years old now, and taller than when I left. His sandy brown hair, so much like mine, flopped into his eyes as he barreled into me with a force that nearly knocked me off balance. "Dad," he cried, his voice cracking with emotion. His arms wrapped tightly around my waist, clinging to me like he feared I might vanish again. My heart ached at the desperation in his embrace. I knelt to his level, ruffling his hair as I searched his face. "Hey, buddy, it's good to see you." Logan didn't reply right away. His lips trembled as he tried to hold back tears, and my unease grew. This wasn't the welcome I had imagined. Not that I'd let myself imagine much during my deployment. "Where's your mom?" I asked, scanning the empty doorway behind him. That's when Logan hesitated, his eyes darting to the ground. He pulled back slightly, wiping his face with his sleeve. "She's not here," he mumbled, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean?" I pressed, feeling a pang of alarm. "Is she at the store?" "At work." Logan shook his head, his gaze still averted. "She's at a church." "Church?" That didn't make sense. Emily wasn't particularly religious. I furrowed my brow. "Church? On a Thursday afternoon? What's going on?" His silence stretched unbearably, and I felt a knot forming in my stomach. Finally, Logan raised his head, his blue eyes filled with a pain that no 12-year-old should ever carry. "She's getting married, Dad. To Ryan." I reeled as if I'd been punched, my breath catching in my throat. "Ryan Bennett? My best friend Ryan?" The words came out sharper than I intended, and Logan flinched. "Yes," he said, his voice breaking. The world tilted on its axis as I tried to comprehend what I had just heard. Ryan Bennett, the man who had been my rock during our high school football days, who had stood by me when I proposed to Emily, who had toasted to my safe return when I left for my first deployment. Ryan had taken my place. The betrayal hit me like a tidal wave, dragging me under with its weight. I tried to steady myself, gripping the porch railing. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Logan hesitated again, his small hands fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. "It started a year after you left," he admitted. She said it was because you weren't here, that you chose to be a soldier over being with us." A lump formed in my throat. My wife had been my anchor, the thought of her and Logan the thing that kept me going through sleepless nights and endless missions. I thought they understood why I left, to serve, to protect, to make the world safer for them. But instead, I had been painted as a deserter. "Who else knows about this?" I asked, my voice growing colder. "Everyone," Logan whispered, his cheeks reddening. "Grandma, Grandpa, Aunt Laura. They all think it's for the best. Even my own family had turned against me." The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. I straightened, my mind racing. Emily might have convinced the world I was gone for good, but I was here now, and I wasn't going to let her rewrite the story. "Get your shoes, Logan. We're going to the church." His eyes widened. "Dad, are you sure?" It's their wedding day." "I'm sure," I said firmly, my jaw tightening. They've had their chance to explain themselves. Now it's my turn. Logan hesitated, but he must have seen the resolve in my eyes because he nodded and disappeared into the house. I paced the porch, my boots thudding against the wood. Memories flashed through my mind. Ryan handing me a beer after we won state championships. Emily crying tears of joy when I returned from my first tour of duty. How could they have betrayed me like this? But another thought nagged at me, one I couldn't ignore. Had I truly abandoned them? Had my years of service left a void that Emily felt compelled to fill? Logan returned, his sneakers scuffed but serviceable. He looked up at me with uncertainty. Are you going to stop them? I placed a hand on his shoulder. I don't know, I admitted, but I need to hear the truth. And so do you. As we climbed into my truck, a storm brewed on the horizon, dark clouds gathering like the emotions swirling inside me. The air felt charged, heavy with the weight of what was to come. And just like that, a crack of thunder rolled across the sky. The sound mirrored the turmoil within me, and I couldn't help but feel that it was only the beginning of something far greater. The church was just down the road, but the journey felt like it stretched for miles. My hands tightened around the wheel as I rehearsed what I might say, but no words seemed sufficient. How do you confront the people you trusted most when they've turned your world upside down? As the church steeple came into view, Logan spoke, breaking the tense silence. Dad, what if she doesn't want to see you? I glanced at him, my chest tightening. Then she'll have to deal with it. But one thing's for sure, this isn't over. The storm above seemed to echo my resolve as rain began to fall, pattering against the windshield. In my heart, I knew I was heading into a battle unlike any I had faced before. But this wasn't a war fought with weapons or strategies. This was personal, and as I pulled into the church parking lot, I realized I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for Logan, for the family I thought I had, and for the truth. With that thought, I stepped out of the truck, the rain soaking my boots as I stared at the church doors. This was it, the moment everything would change. The rain came down in steady sheets as Logan and I climbed the stone steps to the church, the sound of it pounding against the roof adding to the tension that gripped the air. My military fatigues clung to me, soaked from the storm, and Logan's small hand tugged at mine, his grip steady despite the obvious fear in his eyes. Are you sure about this, Dad? He asked again, his voice barely audible over the storm. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I pushed open the heavy wooden doors, letting the sound of the storm follow us into the church. The murmur of a crowd filled the sanctuary, the low hum of voices abruptly cutting off as the doors banged shut behind us. There they were. At the altar stood Ryan, wearing a smug grin that vanished the moment he saw me. Beside him, in a flowing white dress, was Emily. Her face drained of color as her eyes locked onto mine. The congregation sat frozen in the pews, their expressions a mixture of shock, confusion, and guilt. Ethan? Emily's voice wavered, barely more than a whisper. I stepped forward, my boots echoing against the polished wood floor. Logan followed closely behind, his eyes darting nervously around the room. My gaze swept over the faces of the people who had once been my family and friends, people who had conspired, whether actively or passively, to let this happen. This your idea of family? I said, my voice cutting through the silence. The words hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. No one dared to respond. My parents, seated in the front row, looked down at their hands, avoiding my gaze. My sister, Laura, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I could feel the weight of their betrayal, as if it were a physical force pressing against my chest. Ryan stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Ethan, listen, I can explain. No, Ryan. I interrupted, my voice like steel. You don't get to explain. Not today. He opened his mouth to argue, but I closed the distance between us in 2 swift strides, my fist connecting with his jaw before he could get another word out. The force of the punch sent him sprawling to the ground, gasps rippling through the congregation like a wave. Dad! Logan's voice broke through the tension, his hand gripping my arm. I glanced at him, saw the fear in his eyes, and forced myself to take a step back, my breathing ragged as I tried to calm the storm raging inside me. Ryan groaned, clutching his jaw as he struggled to sit up. Emily knelt beside him, her hands hovering uselessly as she stammered. Ethan, please, this isn't what it looks like. I laughed bitterly. Not what it looks like. Emily, you're standing there in a wedding dress, marrying my best friend. How exactly is this supposed to look? Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came. I turned to the congregation, my gaze sweeping over the silent crowd. And you, I said, my voice rising. All of you. How could you let this happen? My own family, my friends. Did any of you think to tell me? Or did you just assume I'd never come back? The silence that followed was deafening. My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat, while my mother dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Laura finally met my gaze, her expression a mixture of guilt and defiance. "It wasn't like that, Ethan," she said, her voice trembling. Emily thought. "Don't," I snapped, cutting her off. "Don't defend her. Don't defend him. There's nothing you can say that makes this okay." I felt Logan's hand tighten around mine, his silent support grounding me in the chaos. I looked down at him, his wide eyes filled with a mix of fear and admiration. "We're done here," I said, my voice low but firm. Turning on my heel, I strode back down the aisle, Logan in tow. Behind me, the congregation erupted into a cacophony of whispers and murmurs, but I didn't look back. My mission was clear now, my resolve solidified by the betrayal I had just witnessed. As we stepped outside, the rain had eased into a gentle drizzle, the storm passing but leaving the air heavy with tension. Logan looked up at me, his expression hesitant. "Dad, what are we going to do now?" he asked. I crouched to his level, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. "We're going to rebuild, Logan. Just you and me. But first, we're going to show them that they can't get away with this." His eyes lit up with a glimmer of hope, and he nodded, his jaw setting with determination. As we walked toward the truck, I couldn't help but reflect on the war that now lay ahead. This wasn't a battlefield of bullets and bloodshed. It was one of strategy, truth, and unwavering resolve. Emily and Ryan had built a comfortable little world for themselves, but I would see it dismantled piece by piece. The rain began to pick up again as I started the truck, the steady rhythm against the windshield matching the beat of my racing heart. Logan sat quietly beside me, his presence a reminder of what I was fighting for. "They think they've won," I muttered, more to myself than to him. "But this isn't over. Not by a long shot." Logan looked at me, his expression serious. "What's the plan, Dad?" A small, grim smile tugged at the corners of my mouth. "The plan is to make them regret underestimating me. To remind them that a Calloway doesn't quit. Not ever." As I pulled out of the church parking lot, the storm clouds parted just enough to let a sliver of sunlight through, illuminating the road ahead. The battle lines had been drawn, and I knew the road would be long and fraught with challenges. But with Logan by my side and my resolve as unshakable as ever, I was ready to face whatever came next. This wasn't just about reclaiming what was mine. It was about honor, loyalty, and the truth. And I wouldn't stop until I had them all. The dim light of the single-desk lamp illuminated the small study I had transformed into a makeshift command center. Maps, documents, and timelines sprawled across the desk and walls like a chaotic web, each strand connecting to the central betrayal that had upended my life. I tapped my pen against a legal pad, the steady rhythm matching my thoughts as I planned my next move. Logan sat on the couch nearby, engrossed in his homework. Every so often, I'd glance at him, my resolve hardening. He was my reason for doing this, my anchor in a sea of anger and betrayal. "Dad," he said suddenly, looking up from his workbook, "are we going to be okay?" I set the pen down and leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk. "Yeah, buddy, we're going to be more than okay. But it's going to take some work." Work was an understatement. What lay ahead would require every ounce of strategy, patience, and skill I had honed over years of military service. I wasn't facing an enemy with guns or tanks. I was facing something far more insidious, betrayal disguised as friendship and family. My phone buzzed, pulling me from my thoughts. It was a message from Sofia Alvarez, a former military intelligence officer I had served with during my second deployment. She had always been sharp, resourceful, and unflinchingly loyal, a rare combination. When I explained my situation to her, she didn't hesitate to offer her help. "Sophia, got what you asked for. Details are worse than we thought. Meeting spot? 10 a.m.? I typed a quick response, my fingers steady despite the churn of emotions beneath the surface. "Me. See you there." The next morning, I met Sophia at a quiet diner just outside of town. She was already seated in a corner booth, a tablet in front of her, and a steaming cup of coffee in hand. Her dark hair was pulled into a tight braid, and her sharp eyes scanned the room before landing on me. "Ethan," she greeted, sliding the tablet across the table as I sat down. "You're going to want to see this." I leaned forward, my jaw tightening as I scrolled through the files she had compiled. Bank statements, emails, and even social media posts painted a damning picture. Ryan had not only wormed his way into Emily's life, he had systematically dismantled mine. He had used my deployment to position himself socially and professionally, stealing my combat stories to gain favor with local veterans groups and community leaders. And Emily, she had spun a narrative that cast me as a heartless absentee father, choosing duty over family. The worst part? My parents and sister had bought into it, financing their wedding and helping Emily build a new life without me. Financial fraud, too, Sophia said, pointing to a highlighted section of the report. Ryan's been skimming funds from investors and inflating his company's success. If this gets out, he's done. I clench my fists, anger simmering beneath the surface. And Emily? Sophia hesitated, her expression softening. She's been manipulating Logan, convincing him you didn't care about them. She's tried to erase you from his life, Ethan. That hit harder than any physical blow I had endured. I sat back, taking a deep breath to steady myself. "Thank you, Sophia," I said finally. "This is exactly what I needed." She nodded, her eyes narrowing with determination. "What's the plan?" "Phase 1, I replied, a grim smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "We hit Ryan where it hurts the most, his reputation." Over the next week, Sophia and I worked tirelessly. Using her contacts and my tactical experience, we leaked key pieces of information about Ryan's business practices to the right people. Anonymous tips reached journalists and investors, and whispers of fraud began to circulate. The fallout was swift. Investors pulled out, one by one, their trust in Ryan eroded by the mounting evidence of his deceit. His company's stock plummeted, and he faced a barrage of legal inquiries. The man who had once stood smugly at the altar now found himself drowning in accusations and scandal. But I didn't stop there. I reached out to community leaders who had supported Ryan, presenting them with undeniable proof of his lies and manipulations. Veterans groups revoked his honorary memberships, denouncing him publicly. The very people he had sought to impress now turned their backs on him. Emily wasn't spared either. The story of her infidelity and the lies she had told about me began to spread. I didn't have to lift a finger for that part. Once Ryan's downfall started, people began to question everything, including the woman who had stood by his side. She faced public disgrace, her carefully crafted image of a wronged wife crumbling under the weight of the truth. Through it all, I shielded Logan as best I could. He stayed with me full-time now, away from the chaos and whispers. In the evenings, we talked about what was happening, not in detail, but enough for him to understand the importance of accountability and honor. Sometimes, doing the right thing means making hard choices, I told him one night as we sat on the porch. But it's worth it. Always. He nodded, his expression serious. "I want to be like you, Dad." Those words strengthened my resolve. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about showing Logan what it meant to stand up for what's right, even when the odds were stacked against you. As Ryan's world crumbled, I saw cracks begin to form in the united front Emily and my family had presented. My parents started calling, leaving voicemails filled with guilt and apologies. Laura sent texts, asking if we could talk. But I wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. The battle was far from over. Ryan and Emily were still standing, and I knew they would try to fight back. But I was ready for them. As I sat in the study that night, Logan asleep in the next room, I stared at the map pinned to the wall. Each pin represented a step in my plan, a calculated move to dismantle the comfortable world they had built at my expense. They thought I'd stay down. I muttered to myself, a determined smile forming. They thought wrong. The next phase was already taking shape in my mind. The architects of my betrayal were faltering, but I wouldn't stop until they understood the full weight of their actions. This wasn't just about justice. It was about redemption. For Logan. For me. For the life they had tried to take away. And I wouldn't stop until it was ours again. The letter from Emily's attorney arrived on a crisp Monday morning, delivered with a knock on the door that broke the calm of our breakfast routine. Logan sat at the kitchen table, spooning cereal into his mouth as I tore open the envelope. The words inside hit like a slap to the face. Notice of custody petition. Emily and Ryan were fighting for custody of Logan. They claimed I was unstable, a danger to my son because of my time in the military. I clenched the paper in my hands, the betrayal striking fresh and sharp. "Dad? What is it?" Logan asked, his spoon pausing midair. I forced a smile, setting the letter aside. "Nothing you need to worry about, buddy. Finish your breakfast." Inside, the anger churned, but I knew this was just another move in their game. A calculated attempt to paint me as the villain. If they thought I'd let them win this fight, they didn't know me at all. The courtroom was a far cry from the battlefields I was used to, but it was no less a war zone. Every word spoken was a weapon, every piece of evidence a tactical strike. Emily and Ryan sat across from me, their attorney weaving a narrative designed to destroy my credibility. Major Ethan Calloway's military record may seem impressive, their lawyers said, pacing before the judge. But the pressures of deployment, the psychological toll of combat, these are serious concerns when considering the well-being of a child. Emily sat beside him, her expression carefully crafted into one of concern. Ryan leaned back in his chair, exuding the smug confidence of a man who thought he had already won. I remained calm, my face betraying none of the anger simmering beneath the surface. I had come prepared. "Your Honor," my attorney, Grace Morgan, began as she stood, her voice steady and commanding. "Let's talk about Major Calloway's military record. But let's hear it from someone who knows it best." The doors to the courtroom opened, and Colonel Andrew Fletcher strode in, his uniform crisp and medals gleaming. He took the stand, his presence commanding respect. "Major Calloway is one of the finest officers I've ever had the privilege to serve alongside," Fletcher testified. "His leadership, integrity, and dedication are unmatched. If anyone is equipped to raise a child with honor and stability, it's him." The judge nodded, clearly impressed, but the battle was far from over. The turning point came when Logan took the stand. I hadn't wanted him involved, but he insisted, his resolve stronger than I'd expected. "I love my dad," he said, his voice clear and unwavering. "He's always there for me. My mom, she tried to tell me that he didn't care about us, but that's not true. He came back for me." The courtroom fell silent as Logan's words hung in the air. Emily shifted uncomfortably, her carefully maintained facade beginning to crack. "And what about your mom?" Grace prompted gently. "Did she say things about your dad?" Logan hesitated, then nodded. "She told me he didn't love us anymore, that he cared more about being a soldier than being with me." A murmur rippled through the room, the weight of his testimony undeniable. Outside the courtroom, Rachel Carter, a tenacious journalist, waited with her notepad and recorder. She had been following the case closely, her articles chronicling the saga with an unflinching eye. "Major Calloway," she said as I stepped outside, Logan at my side. "Do you have a comment for the public?" I looked down at Logan, then back at her. "Only this," I said firmly. "The truth matters, and I'll do whatever it takes to make sure it comes out." Rachel nodded, her pen flying across the page. Within days, her exposé hit the headlines, detailing the betrayal, the custody battle, and the lengths Emily and Ryan had gone to destroy me. Public outrage surged, fueling the pressure on them both. As the court proceedings continued, I launched another offensive. Sophia's research had unearthed irrefutable evidence of Ryan's fraudulent business dealings, and I made sure it found its way to the appropriate authorities. Federal investigations followed, freezing his assets and leaving him scrambling to contain the fallout. Emily wasn't spared either. Rachel's articles highlighted her infidelity, manipulation, and lies, tarnishing her once respectable reputation. Her employer, a prominent law firm, quietly let her go, unwilling to weather the storm of bad press. When the judge finally ruled in my favor, granting me full custody of Logan, I felt a wave of relief. But I knew this was just one battle in a larger war. The victory solidified my resolve. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for Logan, for the truth, for the life they had tried to steal from us. As we left the courthouse, I looked down at my son, his hand firmly in mine. "Does this mean they can't take me away?" he asked, his voice tinged with hope. I crouched to his level, meeting his gaze. "That's exactly what it means, Logan. You're staying with me. Always." He nodded, a small smile breaking through the uncertainty that had clouded his face for weeks. But as I straightened, my mind was already turning to the next phase. Emily and Ryan had thought they could rewrite our story, but I was going to make sure the world saw them for who they truly were. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time in months, I felt like I had the upper hand. With Logan by my side and the truth on my side, I was ready for whatever came next. As I watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, I made a silent vow. This war would end on my terms, and I wouldn't stop until justice was served. The study, now nicknamed the War Room, had become the nerve center of my life. Strings of sticky notes, maps, and printouts webbed across the walls, each connected to the campaign of justice I had been waging for months. Every pin on the board represented a move, a calculated strike against the people who had conspired to dismantle my life. "Ethan, you need to see this." Sophia's voice came through the phone, sharp and urgent. "What V you got?" I asked, pulling my chair closer to the desk. "A gold mine," she replied. "Ryan's been funneling money into offshore accounts, traceable to companies tied to fraud cases. He's also in bed with some questionable investors. I sent you the files." Seconds later, my email dinged. I opened the attachment, scanning the documents Sophia had uncovered. The evidence was damning. Ryan's empire, already weakened by the fallout from earlier exposures, was now primed to collapse entirely. "This is the final push," I said, my voice steady. "Let's make it count." The first strike came through a carefully timed leak. Financial documents and correspondence connecting Ryan to fraudulent activity were anonymously delivered to regulatory agencies and several investigative journalists, including Rachel Carter. Within days, the news broke, painting Ryan as the mastermind behind a tangled web of deceit. Public opinion, already sour, turned venomous. Investors abandoned him in droves. Lawsuits piled up, and federal agents launched an investigation that effectively froze his remaining assets. Ryan had once strutted through the community as a pillar of success. Now, his name was synonymous with corruption. Emily's downfall was no less precise. Her social circle, already fraying under the weight of the truth, began to unravel completely as more of her lies came to light. She had crafted a narrative portraying herself as the victim of a cold and distant husband. But as Rachel's reporting continued to delve into the details of our marriage, her infidelity and manipulations were exposed in excruciating detail. Invitations stopped coming. Her once loyal friends avoided her in public, whispering behind her back. The carefully curated facade she had built crumbled, leaving her isolated and disgraced. My parents and sister weren't spared either. Their complicity in the betrayal was not something I could ignore. My parents had financed Emily's wedding and turned a blind eye to Ryan's actions. My sister Laura had defended them publicly, even as the evidence mounted. Sophia and I compiled a dossier documenting their roles, which Rachel used to craft an article exposing the broader betrayal. It wasn't vengeful, it was justice. Their social and professional circles turned cold, their reputations irreparably damaged. They had chosen their side, and the consequences were inevitable. Meanwhile, Logan watched it all unfold. At 12, he was too young to understand the intricacies of financial fraud or social dynamics, but he grasped the core lesson: loyalty and honor mattered. "Why do they keep lying, Dad?" he asked one evening as we sat on the porch, the twilight sky casting a soft glow over the yard. "Because sometimes people would rather protect their lies than admit they were wrong," I explained, placing a hand on his shoulder. "But the truth always comes out in the end." He nodded thoughtfully, his expression serious. "I want to be like you, someone who stands up for what's right." Those words strengthened my resolve. Everything I was doing wasn't just for me. It was for him, to show him that we could rise above the betrayal and rebuild with integrity. Rachel's articles gained national attention, transforming my fight into a public spectacle. News outlets picked up the story, framing it as a cautionary tale of betrayal, resilience, and the power of strategy. Sophia and I ensured the narrative stayed focused on the truth. Every detail, every piece of evidence was meticulously verified before it went public. The result was a tidal wave of public opinion swinging overwhelmingly in my favor. Ryan and Emily became pariahs. Strangers approached me on the street, offering words of support. Logan's teachers pulled me aside to say how proud they were of him for handling everything so well. The final phase of my campaign was both methodical and merciless. Ryan's business network collapsed completely, leaving him financially ruined and socially ostracized. His ties to unsavory figures became public knowledge, ensuring no one would trust him again. Emily's career was over, her reputation in tatters. Without the support of her social circle or the finances she had relied on, she faced the stark reality of the choices she had made. My parents and sister attempted to reconcile, but I wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. Their actions had cost me too much, and rebuilding that trust would take time, if it ever happened at all. Through it all, Logan and I grew closer. Our evenings were filled with laughter and stories, his curiosity about the world growing with each passing day. "Do you think we'll ever go back to normal?" he asked one night as we played cards at the kitchen table. I considered the question carefully. "Not the old normal," I said, "but maybe something better, stronger." He smiled at that, and for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. As I stood in the study, looking at the web of plans that had guided me through this fight, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The battle wasn't over. Not entirely, but the tide had turned decisively in my favor. The story of my betrayal and response had become a case study in justice and strategic retaliation. I hadn't just fought back. I had dismantled the comfortable world of those who had betrayed me, piece by calculated piece. And as I turned off the desk lamp and headed toward Logan's room to check on him, I knew one thing for certain. We were going to be okay. Better than okay. We were going to thrive. The years moved quietly, their passage marked not by grand events, but by the steady rhythm of rebuilding a life worth living. My home, once the epicenter of betrayal, had become a sanctuary. The walls held laughter again, a sound that had felt foreign in the wake of everything. Logan's voice was louder and more confident now. The quiet boy who once clung to me transformed into a young man I couldn't be prouder of. In the aftermath of the storm, I had focused on what mattered most, creating a life where we could both thrive. Logan deserved stability, and I was determined to give him that. My consulting firm, Callaway Strategies, grew steadily over the years. Veterans filled its ranks, each of them finding new purpose in applying their military expertise to civilian challenges. They brought the same discipline, loyalty, and ingenuity that had carried them through deployments, and together, we built something remarkable. "You've given us more than a job," one of my employees, a retired Marine named Parker, said during a company barbecue. "You've given us a mission." That was what I had always wanted, not just to succeed, but to create something that mattered. Callaway Strategies became known not just for its effectiveness, but for the integrity that defined everything we did. Logan thrived too. The lessons he had learned during those tumultuous years, the importance of truth, honor, and resilience, became cornerstones of his character. He excelled in school, earning a scholarship to study engineering. One day, as we sat on the porch overlooking the rolling hills of our North Carolina home, he turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Dad," he began, "do you ever regret what happened?" "Everything with Mom and Ryan." I considered his question carefully, the memories flickering like an old film reel. "I regret the pain it caused," I said honestly, "but I don't regret standing up for what was right. And I don't regret the life we've built since then." He nodded, his gaze steady. "I want to live like that, to stand up for what's right, no matter how hard it is." "You already do, son," I replied, my chest swelling with pride. Rachel Carter's book, Betrayed, the Ethan Callaway story, became a national bestseller. The book chronicled the betrayal, the calculated retaliation, and the lessons learned along the way. Readers saw it as more than just a personal story. It became a cautionary tale about the consequences of betrayal and the power of truth. Rachel remained a close friend, her work a testament to the strength of integrity in journalism. During a signing event, she pulled me aside, her eyes bright with pride. "Your story changed people's lives, Ethan," she said. "It reminded them that the truth is worth fighting for, no matter the cost." Her words stayed with me, a reminder that our struggles had a greater purpose. Emily, Ryan, and my complicit family members were not as fortunate. Ryan's financial ruin was complete, his fraudulent business practices leaving him bankrupt and ostracized. He faded from public view, his name synonymous with deceit. Emily, once a respected figure in her field, struggled to find any semblance of stability. Her lies had cost her everything: her career, her reputation, and the friendships she had taken for granted. My parents and sister lived in quiet disgrace, their roles in the betrayal forever tarnishing their standing in the community. Attempts at reconciliation had been met with silence on my end. Forgiveness was not something I could give. Not yet, perhaps not ever. As for me, I found love again. Anna Calloway entered my life unexpectedly, a fellow military widow whose strength and warmth drew me in. We met at a veterans fundraiser, her laughter cutting through the noise of the crowd. "Ethan Calloway," she said, extending her hand with a smile. "I've heard your name before, and now I've heard yours," I replied, my own smile widening. Our connection was instant, built on shared experiences and a mutual understanding of loss and resilience. We married 2 years later in a small, private ceremony, Logan standing proudly as my best man. Anna brought light back into my life, her presence a reminder that even after the darkest storms, there could be new beginnings. Together, we created a family built on love, trust, and mutual respect. The scars of betrayal never fully faded, but they became reminders of what I had endured, what I had fought for, and what I had reclaimed. They were not marks of pain, but of resilience, a testament to the power of truth and justice. Logan, now a man of his own, carried those lessons forward. He often spoke about the example I had set, about the importance of standing up for what's right. "Everything I am," he said once, "I owe to you." "No," I corrected gently. "You made your own choices, Logan, and I couldn't be prouder of the man you've become." As I stood on the porch one evening, Anna by my side, the sun dipping below the horizon in a blaze of gold and crimson, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The betrayal that had once shattered my life had been transformed into something greater, a legacy of justice, honor, and resilience. The people who had tried to destroy me would never escape the shadows of their choices. But I no longer dwelled on them. My focus was on the future, on the life I had built, the people I loved, and the values that would guide us forward. The war was over, and I had won, not just for myself, but for Logan, for Anna, and for the principles I held dear. The future was ours, and it was bright. The hall was silent as I stepped onto the stage, the weight of hundreds of young eyes watching me from their seats. The banners of the military academy hung behind me, their proud insignias reminding me of my own beginnings. As I adjusted the microphone, I looked out over the cadets, men and women who had chosen a path of service, discipline, and sacrifice. "Good evening," I began, my voice steady but heavy with meaning. "I stand before you today not just as a veteran, but as someone who has lived through a test of loyalty, honor, and resilience." A sea of attentive faces met my gaze, their curiosity palpable. They had likely read the headlines, seen the stories about what had happened to me years ago. Some of them might have even read Rachel Carter's book. But tonight wasn't about fame or notoriety. It was about lessons. In life, betrayal will come, I continued. Not from strangers, but from those you trust most. It's a hard truth, but one worth understanding. Because when that moment comes, when the ground shifts beneath your feet, you'll have a choice, to crumble or to rise. I paused, letting the weight of the words settle. My mind drifted back to the chaos of those years. Emily and Ryan's betrayal, my family's complicity, the courtroom battles, and the calculated strikes that dismantled the comfortable world they had built on lies. Rising, I said, requires more than strength. It requires strategy, patience, and an unwavering commitment to truth. The cadets leaned forward, their focus sharpening. These were people who understood discipline, who had chosen lives defined by structure and accountability. They didn't need platitudes, they needed substance. I won't sugarcoat it, I said, my tone firm. Ensuring justice isn't easy. Sometimes it requires actions that feel cold, even ruthless. But justice isn't about revenge. It's about setting things right and ensuring that those who hurt others cannot continue to do so. I thought of Ryan, Emily, and my family, living in the ruins of their choices. Ryan's fraudulent empire was long gone, his name now a cautionary tale in business ethics classes. Emily's social and professional prospects had withered, leaving her in a quiet obscurity. My parents and sister had retreated into lives of regret, their complicity a stain they couldn't erase. Justice had been served, not just for me, but for Logan and the values we live by. Some of you will face betrayal, I said, my voice softening. And when you do, remember this. What you do next defines who you are. The choices you make in the face of adversity will shape not only your life, but the lives of those who look to you for guidance. I glanced at the front row, where Logan sat in his cadet uniform, his posture straight and proud. He was a testament to resilience, a young man who had taken the lessons of our journey and woven them into the fabric of his character. After the speech, I stepped off the stage to applause. Logan was the first to meet me, his handshake firm, but his grin wide. "You nailed it, Dad," he said, his voice filled with pride. "Thanks, son," I replied, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "But it's you I'm proud of. You're everything I hoped you'd be, and more." Logan nodded, his expression serious. "It's because of you. Everything you've taught me, everything you've shown me, I'll carry it forward." Watching him, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He was prepared to take on the world, armed with values that would guide him no matter what came his way. Back at home, life had settled into a steady rhythm. Anna's laughter filled the house, a sound that still felt like a gift every time I heard it. My security firm continued to grow, employing veterans and offering them a place to apply their skills in meaningful ways. Our methods, born from the campaign of justice that had reclaimed my life, became the foundation of our success. Clients valued not just our expertise, but the principles we stood for: loyalty, honor, and an unyielding commitment to what was right. Rachel's book, Betrayed, the Ethan Callaway story, had solidified my story as a lesson in resilience and justice. It was taught in ethics courses and referenced in discussions about accountability. But for me, it wasn't about the notoriety, it was about the impact. One day, a letter arrived from a stranger. "Your story saved my family," it read. "I found the strength to confront betrayal in my own life because of what you did. Thank you for showing me the way." The words were humbling, a reminder that the struggle I had endured had ripples far beyond what I could see. As I stood on the porch one evening, the sun casting its golden light over the hills, I reflected on the journey. Betrayal had shattered the life I once knew, but it had also forged something stronger. Logan was preparing to follow in my footsteps, carrying the lessons of loyalty and honor into his future. Anna and I had built a life founded on trust and love, a partnership that reminded me every day of the strength that came from resilience. The scars of betrayal remained, but they no longer carried pain. They were markers of a life rebuilt, a testament to the power of truth and justice. I had fought battles, both on the battlefield and in the courtroom. I had faced the darkest parts of human nature and come out the other side stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. Betrayal may have shattered my old world, but it had given me the foundation to create something new, something stronger. As the last rays of sunlight faded, I turned to Logan, who stood beside me, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "What do you see, son?" I asked. "A future," he replied, his voice steady. "And what will you do with it?" "Honor it," he said, meeting my gaze with the confidence of a young man who knew exactly who he was. In that moment, I knew the legacy was secure. The war was over, and we had won, not just against those who betrayed us, but in the lives we had rebuilt. The future was ours, and it was bright.